I stood in the mirrored elevator of the Peninsula Chicago, tugging at the hem of my $50 0 cents Target coat. It was the kind of coat you grab in a hurry because it's practical, not because it screams success. In a few minutes, I'd be walking into another family dinner, the kind where I'm always the odd one out, the punching bag for their polished egos. My reflection stared back, tired but composed, as I braced myself for the night ahead. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open to the rooftop restaurant, all warm gold lighting and crystal chandeliers. My family, the Bennetts, were already there, holding court at the center table. The Bennetts aren't just any family. They're Chicago royalty, owners of Bennett Healthcare, a private empire of hospitals and pharmaceutical deals. To them, wealth isn't just power, it's proof of worth. And me? I'm Nora Bennett, 30 years old, the one they call the black sheep. There she is, finally. My sister Claire's voice cut through the hum of the restaurant. She leaned back in her Prada dress, her perfectly manicured hand brushing a non-existent speck from her sleeve. What kept you, Nora? Crunching numbers at that little data job of yours? I slid into the empty seat next to my father, ignoring the way his eyes flicked to my scuffed flats with a faint grimace. Work ran late, I said softly, keeping my voice even. Sorry. Still doing that data thing, right? My brother Evan chimed in, his smirk sharp as he toyed with his Cartier watch. At 33, he's the golden boy, always ready with a jab. What is it, spreadsheets, reports, something like that? Something like that, I replied, my tone flat. In truth, I'm the president of Vionex Partners, a biotech investment firm that's reshaping the industry. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. My father let out a sigh, the kind that felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing his disappointment in me for years. Nora, you're 30. When are you going to stop wasting your life? Claire's spearheading a global campaign for our new drug launch. Evan just secured a $12 million 0 cents deal for a new clinic chain in Los Angeles. I keep things running smoothly, I said, forcing a polite smile. Claire laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound. Smoothly? You mean riding a bike around Chicago and slaving away in some cubicle? Evan leaned forward, his grin widening. Big news for tomorrow, Nora. Bennett Healthcare's signing a deal with Vionex Partners, $75 million. You probably haven't heard of them. Way above your pay grade. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, hiding the twitch at the corner of my mouth. Vionex Partners, my company. I'd been negotiating this deal with them for 6 months, watching their emails pile up, their numbers shift, their egos inflate. They're sending someone named Nora Caldwell, right? Claire said, her brow furrowing as she glanced at Evan. Sounds like some junior staffer signing for the real boss. I met their gazes, steady and unblinking. You'll meet her tomorrow. They burst into laughter, clinking their wine glasses, toasting to the Bennett legacy, to their unstoppable empire. My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with pity. Nora, you could at least try to fit in. Maybe dress a little better, act like you belong to this family. I nodded, letting their words roll off me like they always did. They talked about their gala plans, their new jets, their endless string of triumphs. Meanwhile, I ran through tomorrow's meeting in my head. The agenda, the contract, the moment they'd realize they needed my signature to save their crumbling empire. They called me the black sheep, the disappointment, the one who'd never measure up. But tomorrow they'd see me for who I really am. The waiter brought out the appetizers and Claire launched into a story about her latest marketing campaign, her voice loud enough to draw eyes from nearby tables. "The drug's going to revolutionize treatment," she said, her eyes gleaming. "And this Vionics deal, it's going to put Bennett healthcare on a whole new level." Evan nodded, swirling his wine. "Vionics knows we're the real players. They wouldn't dare pass up a chance to work with us." I stayed quiet, picking at my salad, letting them bask in their arrogance. My father turned to me, his voice heavy with that familiar mix of frustration and pity. "Nora, you could have been part of this. If you'd just gone to medical school like we wanted, you'd be sitting here with something to show for yourself." "I'm doing fine," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Fine?" My mother raised an eyebrow, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Fine is for people who settle, Nora. Look at your siblings. They're building something real." I thought about the email sitting in my inbox, the one from my CFO about a new acquisition that would shake up the biotech world. I thought about the 45 companies Vionics held stakes in, the deals I'd closed while my family was busy flaunting their wealth. But I didn't say a word. I just smiled and took another sip of water. Claire leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, this Vionics deal isn't just about money. It's tied to our family's legacy. The drug formula that put Bennett Healthcare on the map decades ago. They want access to it. It's a big responsibility." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Drug formula? That was new. My family rarely talked about the origins of their empire, always brushing it off as history. But something in Claire's tone, the way her eyes darted to my father, made me wonder what they weren't saying. Evan caught my expression and laughed. "Don't worry, Nora. It's not like you'd understand the details. Stick to your spreadsheets." The table erupted in chuckles, and I let them have their moment. They thought they were untouchable, that their name carried all the weight in the world, but I knew better. I'd seen the cracks in their empire, the debts piling up, the projects stalling, the deals they couldn't close without Vionics' money. And I knew something else, something they'd never suspect. I held the key to their survival. As the main course arrived, my family kept talking, their voices blending into a familiar hum of self-congratulation. I sat there, the quiet one, the disappointment, the one they'd written off years ago. But inside, I was counting down the hours until tomorrow, until the moment they'd see the truth. They could mock me all they wanted tonight. Tomorrow, they'd be begging for my help. The dinner dragged on, my family's voices rising and falling like a rehearsed performance, each word a reminder of how little they thought of me. I sat there, picking at my dessert, letting their jabs wash over me. They saw me as Nora Bennett, the 30-year-old data analyst who'd never amount to anything, the one who'd chosen a pointless career over their grand vision of medical glory. But they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know who I'd become. Growing up in the Bennett household wasn't easy. My family's name was synonymous with power. Bennett Healthcare owned hospitals, funded drug trials, and rubbed shoulders with senators. My father James and mother Evelyn built an empire they expected us to inherit. Evan, my brother, was groomed to expand their clinics. Claire, my sister, was their marketing genius, spinning their brand into gold. And me? I was the odd one out, the kid who'd rather spend hours analyzing data than memorizing medical textbooks. I loved numbers, the way they told stories no one else could see. But when I told my parents I wanted to study data science, they laughed. "What's that going to do for you?" my father said. "You'll end up in some dead-end office job." They pushed me toward medical school, insisting it was the only path to matter in our family. When I refused, they didn't just disapprove, they wrote me off. "You're throwing away your potential," my mother said, her voice cold. "You'll regret this." I didn't. At 26, I landed a job at BioSpark, a biotech startup with big dreams and bigger problems. They had cutting-edge diagnostic tech tests that could catch diseases years before symptoms, but their finances were a disaster. The founders were scientists, not business people, and they were drowning in debt. I saw something no one else did, a chance to turn it around. While my family was busy flaunting their wealth at galas, I was poring over BioSpark's cash flow, spotting patterns, finding ways to save it. When BioSpark hit rock bottom, I made my move. I scraped together every penny of my savings. $15,000, 0 cents, barely enough for a used car, and used it to buy a controlling stake. The founders were desperate, happy to hand over the reins so they could focus on their labs. I didn't tell anyone, not even my best friend. I didn't need applause. I just needed to prove to myself I could do it. That was 4 years ago. Since then, I turned BioSpark into Vionex Partners, a biotech investment firm that's now a quiet giant in the industry. We hold stakes in 45 companies worldwide, startups developing cancer therapies, gene editing tools, vaccines that could change the world. Vionex doesn't just fund projects, we reshape them, steering brilliant minds toward breakthroughs while keeping their books in the black. Our deals have outmaneuvered Bennett Healthcare more times than I can count, snatching research grants and partnerships right out from under them. And my family? They had no idea I was behind it. I kept my tracks covered. Board meetings happened over encrypted video calls, my voice masked by software. I ran everything through shell companies, my name buried under layers of legal paperwork. To the world, I was just Nora Bennett, the data analyst who rode a bike to work and lived in a cramped Chicago apartment. I didn't need a flashy car or a penthouse to feel powerful. Power was in the work. The late nights crunching numbers, the deals I closed while my family slept, the lives we were saving through the companies I backed. I could have told them. I could have walked into one of their dinners and laid it all out, how Vionex was worth billions, how I'd built something bigger than their precious empire. But I didn't. They wouldn't have believed me. They only respected what they could see. Private jets, designer suits, headlines. They'd have laughed, or worse, tried to take credit. So I stayed silent, letting them think I was the failure they'd always seen. But something changed a few months ago. I was digging through BioSpark's old files, looking for data on an early project, when I found a faded document tucked away in a forgotten folder. It was a research paper, handwritten, detailing a drug formula that revolutionized treatment for a rare disease. The author was Mildred Bennett, my great-aunt, a name I'd only heard in passing. My parents mentioned her once or twice, always with a dismissive wave, saying she was unstunnable and left the family years ago. But this paper told a different story. Mildred was a brilliant researcher, one of the first women in her field. Her formula was the cornerstone of Bennett Healthcare's early success, the drug that put their name on the map. But there was no record of her in the company's history, no awards, no mentions, nothing. The document hinted at something darker. Notes about disputes, legal battles, a family that turned its back on her. It wasn't hard to piece together. They'd stolen her work, erased her name, and built their legacy on her brilliance. The thought made my blood boil, but it also lit a fire in me. I wasn't just building Vionex for myself anymore. I was doing it for her, for the woman they'd buried. That discovery changed how I saw my family's empire. Their legacy wasn't just built on ambition, it was built on lies. I started looking closer at their business, using my access to industry data to track their moves. Bennett Healthcare was in trouble. Their clinics were over-leveraged, their drug trials were stalling, and their cash flow was a house of cards. They needed the Vionix deal to survive, and they had no idea they were negotiating with me. I kept living my quiet life, biking through Chicago's windy streets, wearing thrift store sweaters, blending into the background. But every night I'd power up my laptop in my tiny apartment, diving into reports, emails, and contracts. I was closing deals that would make headlines, steering Vionix toward a future my family couldn't even dream of. And all the while I carried Mildred's story with me, a reminder of why I was doing this, not for their approval, but for the truth. Back at the dinner, my family was still talking, oblivious to the storm coming their way. Claire was gushing about her upcoming gala, Evan was bragging about his new yacht, and my parents were nodding along, their faces glowing with pride. I sat there, the odd one out, the one they'd never understand. But I wasn't the same Nora they'd dismissed all those years ago. I'd built something they couldn't touch. Something that would force them to see me. Tomorrow they'd learn the truth. Tomorrow they'd need me. The dessert plates were cleared, but the dinner was far from over. My family's voices filled the rooftop restaurant, each word laced with the smug confidence I'd grown up hearing. The chandelier light glinted off their wine glasses, their designer watches, their perfectly tailored clothes. To anyone watching, the Bennetts were the picture of success. Chicago's healthcare royalty, untouchable and unstoppable. But I saw the cracks they hid so well. The forced smiles, the quick glances when money was mentioned, the way my father's jaw tightened at the word debt. They were putting on a show, and I was the easiest target to keep it going. "Nora, you're awfully quiet tonight," my mother, Evelyn, said, her voice sweet but sharp, like honey over a blade. She adjusted her diamond earrings, her eyes scanning my thrift store sweater with barely concealed pity. "Not much to share about that data job of yours, I suppose." I took a slow breath, keeping my face neutral. "It's been a busy week, just tying up some loose ends." "Loose ends?" Evan, my brother, snorted, leaning back in his chair. At 33, he had the kinder of charm that worked on everyone but me. He flicked a speck of lint from his Tom Ford blazer. "What, like fixing someone's spreadsheet? Must be thrilling." The table chuckled, and I let it pass, stirring my coffee. They didn't know I'd spent the last week finalizing a deal to acquire a Boston research lab, one that was developing a therapy that could save thousands of lives. They didn't know I was the president of Vionix Partners, the biotech investment firm they were pinning their hopes on. And they definitely didn't know I was about to turn their world upside down. Claire, my 36-year-old sister, jumped in, her Prada dress catching the light as she leaned forward. "You know, Nora, if you ever want to do something real, I could get you a job in our marketing department. Entry level, of course, but it's better than whatever you're doing now." "Thanks, Claire," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm good where I am." "Good?" My father, James, raised an eyebrow, his tone heavy with disappointment. "Good isn't enough, Nora. Look at your siblings. Evan's building a clinic empire. Claire's campaign is putting our new drug in every hospital in the country. And you're what, playing with numbers in some cubicle?" I thought about the numbers I'd been playing with. The ones that had turned BioSpark into Vionix Partners. The ones that had secured stakes in 45 biotech companies. The ones that had outmaneuvered Bennett Healthcare in deal after deal. But I didn't say a word. I just smiled and took a sip of my coffee, letting them think they had me figured out. My mother sighed, her voice softer now, almost pitying. "Nora, it's not too late to change. You're 30. If you just tried a little, maybe got your hair done, wore something that didn't look like it came from a bargain bin, you might find someone worthwhile. Claire's husband Thomas is a director at a hedge fund. You could have that kind of life." Claire smirked, tossing her hair. "Speaking of Thomas, we're hosting a healthcare gala next month. $6,000 a ticket. But don't worry, Nora. We'll make sure you don't feel too out of place." Evan laughed loud enough to draw eyes from nearby tables. "Yeah, though you might want to borrow a dress. That sweater's not exactly gala material." I pictured the gala invitations sitting on my desk at home, addressed to the president of Vionics Partners. They'd practically begged me to attend, not knowing I was the one they were courting. "I'll manage," I said, my voice steady. "Success looks different for everyone." My father scoffed, setting his glass down with a clink. "That's what people say when they've given up." The word stung, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard them before. Every dinner, every holiday, every time I dared to exist in their world. They thought they knew me, Nora Bennett, the failure, the black sheep, the one who'd never live up to the Bennett name. But they didn't know about the empire I'd built in silence. The deals I'd closed while they were busy preening for the cameras. They didn't know about Vionics or the $75 million 0 cents contract they were counting on to save their sinking ship. And they didn't know about Mildred, my great aunt, whose stolen legacy was about to change everything. Claire's voice pulled me back to the table. "You know, Nora, it's a shame you didn't stick with that little startup you worked for. What was it called? BioSpark? Guess who bought them out?" "Vionics Partners." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with smug satisfaction. "If you'd stayed, you might have actually been part of something big for once." I dabbed my lips with my napkin, hiding the grin threatening to break through. "Yeah," I said softly. "Imagine that." My mother waved a hand, her rings flashing. "Let's not dwell on Nora's missed opportunities. The Vionics deal is what matters now. Their president is brilliant, ruthless, private, exactly the kind of person you'll never be." I raised my glass, my voice barely above a whisper. "Here's to surprises." Claire nodded, oblivious, her chin lifting like she was announcing royalty. "The president's sending someone to sign the contract tomorrow. They're picky about their partnerships, but they know the Bennett name is unmatched." "Clearly," I murmured, glancing at my phone under the table. An email from my CFO had just come through, flagged urgent. A new acquisition in Seattle, a lab that could redefine cancer diagnostics. The kind of deal Claire couldn't even fathom. "Put that away," my mother snapped, her voice cutting through the hum of the restaurant. "It's rude, Nora. It's not like you're getting anything important." If she knew I was in the middle of a 9-figure deal, she might have swallowed her words. But I just nodded, slipping my phone into my purse. Let them believe what they wanted. For now. The conversation shifted back to their favorite topic, themselves. Evan bragged about his new yacht, docked in Miami, and how he'd be hosting investors there next month. Claire gushed about her gala guest list, name-dropping CEOs and politicians. My parents soaked it all in, their faces glowing with pride for their real children. I was the easy target, the quiet disappointment, the one they could jab at to feel better about their own fragile empire. But then Claire said something that made my ears prick up. "This Vionics deal, it's not just about the money. It's about securing our legacy. They want access to our family's original drug formula, the one that started it all. It's a delicate matter." I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. That formula again. The same one Mildred had developed, the one my family had built their empire on after erasing her name. Claire's voice was casual, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes, a quick glance at my father that didn't go unnoticed. What were they hiding? Evan caught my expression and smirked. "Don't strain yourself, Nora. It's complicated stuff. way beyond your little data world. I set my cup down, my mind racing. The formula was the key to their legacy, but it was also their Achilles heel. I'd found proof of Mildred's work, and I'd spent weeks tracking down the legal rights to it. If my suspicions were right, that formula was about to become my leverage, the thing that would bring their house of cards crashing down. The waiter brought the check, and Evan tossed down his black Amex with a flourish. "Next round's at my new condo," he said, his grin smug. "Though, Nora, you might feel a bit out of place. It's not exactly bike-friendly." Claire laughed, her voice sharp. "Don't worry, Nora. Maybe one day you'll visit one of my resorts. I'll even give you the family discount." I grabbed my worn tote bag and stood, smoothing my sweater. "Good luck with tomorrow," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I hope everything goes exactly as you planned." Claire's smirk faltered for a split second, but she recovered. "Some of us can handle real business, Nora. Just don't let your little data gig make you late for work." I walked past their sleek cars, Claire's Porsche, Evan's Tesla, toward my battered bike locked outside. Tomorrow I'd arrive in a chauffeured car dressed like the president I was. Tomorrow they'd learn the truth. But tonight I pedaled home to my tiny apartment, powered up my laptop, and finalized another deal. Because real power doesn't need a spotlight. It builds quietly, relentlessly, until no one can look away. The morning sun cut through the Chicago skyline, sharp and unrelenting, as I stepped out of a chauffeured black SUV in front of Bennett Healthcare's headquarters. Gone was the Nora in a Target coat and scuffed flats. Today I wore a tailored silk suit, its deep navy catching the light like a quiet declaration of power. My Jimmy Choo heels clicked against the pavement, each step deliberate, each breath steady. My assistant Emma walked a step behind, her arms cradling a sleek Toomey briefcase that held the $75 million 0 cents contract my family was banking on. This wasn't just a meeting. This was the moment I'd been building toward for years. The lobby buzzed with the usual corporate energy, executives in crisp suits, assistants juggling coffee and tablets. But as I crossed the marble floor, heads turned, whispers trailing in my wake. The receptionist, a young woman who'd seen me at family events, froze when she caught my eye. "Miss Bennett," she stammered, then corrected herself, glancing at her screen. "I mean, Miss Caldwell? You're on the VIP list. The executive elevator is this way." I gave her a small nod, my face composed. "Thank you." Every click of my heels echoed like a heartbeat, counting down to the moment my family would see me for who I really was. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, just me, Emma, and the weight of 4 years of work. Through the glass walls of the boardroom I could see them, my family, waiting for Nora Caldwell from Vionics Partners. Claire paced in her Prada dress, her movements sharp with nervous energy. Evan fiddled with his tie, a telltale sign he was out of his depth. My parents, James and Evelyn, sat at the head of the table, their faces a mix of anticipation and arrogance. They thought they were about to seal their legacy. They had no idea they were about to lose it. Emma glanced at her watch. 10 o'clock sharp. Ready? I smiled, a quiet, unshakable calm settling over me. "I've been ready since I was 26. She opened the door, and the room fell silent. 4 pairs of eyes locked on me, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock as I stepped inside, the briefcase in my hand a silent promise of what was to come. "Nora," Claire's voice cracked, her face paling. What are you doing here?" "We're about to have a very important meeting," my father said, his tone clipped, his eyes narrowing. "You need to leave." I know, I said, setting the briefcase on the glass table with a soft thud. I clicked it open, my movements deliberate. That's why I'm here. My mother's hand flew to her pearls, her fingers tightening like they could hold her world together. This isn't the time for games, Nora, she said, her voice trembling with indignation. I pulled out the contract, a thick stack of crisp pages, and slid it across the table. It's not a game, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. Vianix Partners' president is already here. The silence was deafening. Evan's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. Claire's hands gripped the table, her knuckles white. My father's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his tailored suit. "What kind of nonsense is this?" he barked. "Where's the real president?" I slid my business card across the table. Simple, elegant, black text on ivory. Nora Caldwell, President and Founder, Vianix Partners. My father snatched it up, his eyes scanning the card as if it might vanish. "This is impossible," he sputtered. "Vianix is worth billions. You're just a data analyst, a nobody." "A nobody?" I asked, my voice level but laced with steel. "A failure? The black sheep? Which is it, Dad?" Emma stepped forward, distributing copies of the contract with a calm efficiency that mirrored my own. "You'll want to review Section 9.2 closely," I said, folding my hands on the table. "It outlines management restructuring. Claire, you'll be stepping down as marketing director." Claire's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "You can't do this. This is my deal, my campaign." "Actually," I said, my tone cool, "it's my deal. Just like the last 3 campaigns you took credit for, all funded by Vianix subsidiaries." I turned to Evan, who looked like he'd been punched. "And your clinic chain, Evan? The one you've been bragging about? Vianix owns the majority of your debt. You work for me now." My mother's voice was a whisper, barely audible. "Nora, how—" I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of my words settle. "I haven't been a data analyst in years. That startup you mocked me for working at, BioSpark? I bought it when it was failing, used my own savings to take control. I turned it into Vianix Partners, a firm that now holds stakes in 45 biotech companies worldwide. While you were busy flaunting your jets and galas, I was building an empire, and you never saw it coming." Claire's hands trembled as she flipped through the contract, her eyes darting over the pages like she could will them to change. "This can't be real," she stammered. "You're lying. You're not capable of this." "Not capable?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I've been running Vianix for 4 years. I've closed deals you couldn't dream of, outbid your company on projects you thought were yours. And this contract?" I tapped the papers in front of them. "It's the only thing keeping Bennett Healthcare from collapse. Your debts are piling up faster than you can hide them. You need this $75 million, 0 cents. And you need me to sign it." My father lurched to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous. You can't just waltz in here and—" "I can," I cut in, my voice calm but razor sharp. "And I have. Vianix isn't some small player. We're a cornerstone of the biotech industry, and your company is just a footnote in our portfolio. But because you're family, I'm giving you a choice. Sign the contract, accept the terms, or watch your empire crumble when we call in your debts." The room was so quiet I could hear Claire's uneven breathing. My mother sat slumped, her perfect posture gone. Evan stared at the contract like it was written in blood. My father's hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. But I wasn't done. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age, and placed it on the table. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice softening but carrying a weight that pinned them in place. "Your Bennett legacy, the one you've built your empire on? It's a lie. This is a research paper by Mildred Bennett, my great-aunt. She developed the drug formula that made your company famous. You erased her name, stole her work, and passed it off as your own. I found the proof, and I bought the legal rights to that formula. Bennett Healthcare no longer owns it." Claire's face went pale, almost green. "You're making this up," she whispered, but her voice shook, betraying her. "Am I?" I asked, sliding the paper toward my father. "Read it. Mildred was a pioneer, a woman who broke barriers in a field that didn't want her. You cast her out, buried her legacy, and built your empire on her brilliance. But not anymore. That formula belongs to Vionics now, and you'll need my permission to use it." My father's hands trembled as he picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the faded handwriting. My mother's face crumpled, her pearls forgotten. Evan looked like he wanted to disappear. Claire's shoulders shook, tears welling in her eyes. I stood, smoothing my suit, my voice steady. "This contract comes with conditions. Claire, you're out as marketing director. Evan, your clinics will report to Vionics. And the formula? That's non-negotiable. Sign and you get the $75 million 0 cents to keep your company afloat. Refuse, and you lose everything." The next hour was brutal. For them, not me. I walked them through the contract line by line, pausing at key clauses to let the reality sink in. Their empire was crumbling, and I was the only one who could save it. Claire's face was a mask of shock and humiliation. Evan's fake confidence had vanished, replaced by a pale, wide-eyed stare. My parents, always so poised, looked like they'd aged a decade in minutes. Finally, my father picked up the pen, his hand shaking as he signed. Claire followed, her tears smudging the ink. Evan scribbled his name like a man signing his own surrender. My mother was last, her signature barely legible. Emma collected the contracts, her movements brisk and professional. I slipped on my coat, my voice calm. "I have another meeting across town. Emma will walk you through the transition. Let yourselves out." I paused at the door, my hand on the handle, and turned back. "Oh, and Claire? That gala next month? Don't worry about my invitation. I bought the venue last year. Funny how that works." I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence, their world shattered by the truth I'd carried for years. The black sheep had just taken the throne. The elevator doors closed behind me, and the hum of the descent felt like a release, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for years. I stepped out of Bennett Healthcare's headquarters into the Chicago morning, the city's pulse thrumming around me. Taxis honking, pedestrians weaving, the wind carrying the sharp edge of spring. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not because I'd won, though I had. Not because I'd proven them wrong, though I'd done that too. I was free because I no longer needed their approval, their validation, their version of who I was supposed to be. The boardroom scene replayed in my mind as I walked to my car. Claire's tear-streaked face, Evan's stunned silence, my parents' shattered composure. They'd signed the contract, handed over their empire's future to the daughter they'd called a failure. They'd learned the truth about Vionics Partners, about my role as its president, about the $75 million 0 cents they needed to survive. And they'd learned about Mildred, my great-aunt, whose stolen drug formula had built their legacy on a lie. I'd walked out with their signatures and their secrets, leaving them to pick up the pieces of their pride. But this wasn't about revenge, it was about liberation. For years I'd carried their judgment like a weight, Every dinner, every jab, every time they'd looked at me like I was less. I'd built Vianix partners in silence, not to spite them, but to prove to myself that I was enough. And now, standing in the shadow of their glass tower, I knew I was. I didn't change my life overnight. I kept my little Chicago apartment, its creaky floors and mismatched furniture, a reminder of where I'd started. I donated my old bike to a women's shelter, a small gesture that felt right. But I also had a secret, a penthouse downtown, tucked away in a sleek high-rise, where I'd retreat to pore over data or just watch the city lights. It wasn't about showing off, it was about balance, about knowing I could have both the quiet life I loved and the power I'd earned. My family tried to rewrite the story, of course. In the weeks that followed, they spun a new narrative for their friends, their colleagues, their social circle. "We always knew Nora was special," my mother told her book club, her smile tight. "She just needed time to shine." My father started calling me our visionary daughter at industry events, as if he'd been in on it all along. Claire and Evan were quieter, their egos bruised, their roles at Bennett Healthcare reduced to figureheads under Vianix oversight. They didn't fight it. They couldn't. The debts were too deep, the truth too undeniable. I let them talk. Their words didn't matter anymore. I was done performing for their approval, done shrinking to fit their expectations. Instead, I turned my focus to something bigger, something that felt like justice. Not just for me, but for the woman they'd erased. Mildred Bennett's story haunted me. Her research paper, those faded pages I'd found in BioSpark's archives, wasn't just proof of her brilliance. It was a testament to her courage. She'd been a trailblazer in a world that didn't welcome women like her, and my family had buried her to protect their image. I couldn't let that stand. So I organized a medical symposium in her name, a public event to honor her contributions and set the record straight. The symposium was held in a grand Chicago venue, one I'd quietly acquired through Vianix years ago. I invited researchers, doctors, industry leaders, and my family. They showed up dressed in their finest, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. I stood at the podium, my navy dress simple but sharp, and told Mildred's story. I shared her research, her formula, her fight to be heard. I showed the world the truth. Bennett Healthcare's legacy began with her, not them. The audience listened, rapt, as I unveiled a plaque in her honor to be displayed at every Vianix-funded lab. My family sat in the front row, silent for once. Claire's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, Evan's jaw was set, and my parents' eyes were fixed on the floor. They didn't dare interrupt, they knew the truth was out and there was no taking it back. When the event ended, they approached me, their voices low, their words careful. "We didn't know," my mother said, her face pale. "We should have done better." I looked at her, at all of them, and felt nothing but calm. "You didn't want to know," I said, "but I did, and now everyone else does too." That night, I launched a scholarship in Mildred's name, funding young researchers who'd been told their dreams were too big, too risky, too different. I thought of the girls out there, like me, like Mildred, who'd been dismissed by their families, their voices drowned out by expectation. I wanted them to know they could build something anyway, that their worth didn't depend on anyone else's permission. The next family dinner was different. It wasn't at their usual rooftop haunt, but in my penthouse, 60 stories above the city. They marveled at the floor-to-ceiling views, the modern art on the walls, the quiet luxury of a space I'd earned. I raised a glass of wine that cost more than Claire's monthly rent, and made a simple toast. "To success," I said, my voice soft but clear. Not the kind you flaunt, but the kind you build when no one's looking. No one responded. For once, they had nothing to say. The black sheep had silenced the flock. I still shop at Target sometimes, still wear my thrift store sweaters when I want to, not because I have to, but because I can. Real power doesn't need to prove itself with flash or noise. It's in the choices you make, the work you do, the truth you hold on to when everyone else looks away. I learned that from Mildred, from the years I spent building Vionex, from the moment I walked into that boardroom and changed everything. My family will never fully understand me, and that's okay. I don't need them to. I know who I am. A woman who turned $15,000 0 cents into a billion-dollar empire, who brought justice to a forgotten hero, who built a life on her own terms. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to fit someone else's mold to be worthy. You just have to know your own value and keep building, quietly, relentlessly, until the world can't help but see you.